When most people hear the phrase quantum computing, they picture a miracle machine sitting in a glowing lab somewhere, humming like a saintly refrigerator and preparing to solve every problem known to man. That picture is wrong in a useful way. Quantum computing is not mainly about a futuristic box. It is about power. It is about who gets to break old codes, who gets to write the new ones, who controls the hardware, who trains the physicists, who sets the standards, who attracts the capital, and who turns a strange piece of science into leverage over finance, defense, industry, and data. The geopolitics of quantum computing is not the story of one machine conquering the world. It is the story of states realizing that the next serious contest may be fought in laboratories, chip fabs, export control offices, and standards bodies long before it is felt by ordinary people. That is why this subject matters now. The quantum race has already escaped the seminar room. It is walking around in a suit and talking to ministries. The first thing to understand is that governments are not excited about quantum because they are bored and need a new science fair. They are excited because quantum computing threatens one of the hidden foundations of modern order: trust in encrypted systems. Bank transfers, military communications, industrial secrets, intelligence files, diplomatic traffic, cloud services, software updates, and secure websites all rely on cryptographic methods that today's normal computers struggle to crack in practice. A powerful enough quantum computer could change that balance for certain kinds of encryption. That is why standards agencies and intelligence bureaucracies have already begun preparing for a post-quantum world. This is no longer science fiction. When agencies that live off memos and technical guidance start moving with urgency, it means the adults in the building have decided the problem is real enough to plan around. Bureaucrats do not sprint often, so when they lace up their shoes, it is worth watching. That is also why the real geopolitical clock is not measured only by the day a quantum computer breaks something important. It is measured by the years before that day. There is a phrase people use in this field: harvest now, decrypt later. An adversary can steal encrypted data today and save it for a future in which stronger quantum systems exist. That means the race is not simply about future power, it is about present vulnerability. States that move early on quantum-resistant cryptography protect their archives, their supply chains, and their communications. States that move slowly may discover that the secrets they thought were safely buried were merely placed in cold storage for later consumption. The glamour of quantum computing gets most of the headlines, but the first real victories may belong to the countries that take migration seriously, update their cryptography sooner, and treat digital plumbing with the respect most people reserve for fighter jets. Now look at China, because China has been treating quantum as a strategic matter for far longer than many Western observers were comfortable admitting. Beijing did not stumble into this field after a few venture rounds and a patriotic speech. It built toward it. It backed research over many years, funded laboratories, built regional clusters, and treated quantum science as part of a national effort rather than as a charming eccentricity for professors. China elevated quantum to priority status long before it became fashionable in Western media, and that has given it time to build real institutional depth. There is a reason so much of China's strategic technology posture feels purposeful. The Chinese state still remembers how to behave like a state. It picks areas it considers essential, then builds bureaucratic channels, talent pipelines, regional ecosystems, and industrial strategies so those areas have somewhere to grow. That reveals something larger about the contest. The West often talks about quantum computing as though it were a race to build one all-powerful machine first. China seems to understand that the larger prize is system building: quantum communications, quantum networks, quantum secure links, quantum sensing, and quantum computing all feed one another politically, even when they do not feed one another technically. A country that ties them together can shape procurement, standards, demand, and industrial expectations all at once. That matters because the world is not won by isolated breakthroughs alone. It is won by turning breakthroughs into durable systems. In geopolitics, the ability to shape the environment often matters more than the ability to win the prettiest science contest. The United States still has enormous strengths, and it would be foolish to pretend otherwise. America has top-tier universities, major cloud providers, a strong defense market, serious venture capital, deep engineering talent, and an old habit of turning odd science into useful tools faster than many centralized systems can. The United States remains one of the few countries on Earth that can take a strange concept from a physics department and start turning it into a commercial industry with military implications before half the world has finished its panel discussion on ethics. That is not a small advantage. It is one of the great strengths of the American system. But American strength comes with a familiar problem: fragmentation. The country has talent, institutions, money, and ambition, yet it often struggles to bind them together with consistent, long-range discipline. Different agencies have their own mandates, their own budget cycles, their own cultural habits, and their own definitions of urgency. The United States still has the better engine. The question is whether it remembers how to tune it as a national engine, rather than as a collection of gifted parts arguing in adjacent garages. America is very good at discovery. It is less good at acting as though discovery needs an industrial afterlife. That matters in a field like quantum, where science, security, and supply chains do not politely stay in their assigned lanes. This is why the growing political attention in Washington matters. When congressional committees, security agencies, standards bodies, and cabinet departments all start talking about quantum in the same breath, something has changed. This is no longer a niche hobby for physicists and optimistic hedge funds. It now lives inside a broader American argument about strategic leadership, research security, manufacturing, and national defense. One can roll one's eyes at official rhetoric. Heaven knows there is enough of it. Yet political attention is still a sign of recognition. Washington often wakes up late, but once it smells a strategic race, it does tend to reach for a large ledger and a somewhat alarming number of acronyms. If the United States is going to stay ahead, it will need more than great papers and entrepreneurial flair. It will need continuity, clearer priorities, and a serious understanding that scientific leadership is not self-sustaining. Europe, meanwhile, is approaching quantum through the language of sovereignty. That is a very European way of admitting dependence without using the rude words. Brussels increasingly understands that it would prefer not to repeat the old story in which Europe produces excellent science, then watches other powers build the profitable and strategic industries around it. Quantum has become another field where Europe wants to avoid becoming a museum with superb researchers and imported strategic technology. That ambition makes sense. A continent cannot live indefinitely on memory, architecture, and regulatory paperwork. At some point, it needs real leverage. The European instinct here is revealing. Rather than merely boasting about research excellence, Europe is trying to build infrastructure, pilot lines, design capacity, skills programs, and closer ties between quantum science and space. That is not a romantic approach, but it is a mature one. The question is not whether Europe can produce bright people. It plainly can. The question is whether it can keep those people inside systems strong enough to turn knowledge into durable strategic capacity. Europe has often excelled at the beginning of scientific stories and then drifted out of the middle chapters where money, scale, and statecraft begin to matter. Quantum is one more chance to prove that this pattern is not destiny. The United Kingdom is making a similar move, though with a slightly more practical and mission-shaped tone. Britain's language around quantum tends to focus on usable capabilities rather than vague future wonder. That is a healthy instinct. The point of quantum is not to own a cool machine for conference slides. The point is to build national capacity in computation, navigation, communications, sensing, and defense resilience. Britain is trying to treat quantum as part of national infrastructure rather than as decorative science. That is much wiser than chasing prestige in the abstract. A country with weak timing, weak navigation, and weak secure communications does not become more sovereign because its academics publish elegant papers and smile modestly at conferences. Then there is export control, which is where scientific competition becomes openly geopolitical. Once governments begin restricting the movement of quantum-related hardware, software, technology, and expertise, they are admitting that this field has crossed a line. It is no longer merely a matter of open scientific exchange. It is a lever of national power. Export controls reveal the true mood behind polite public language. They tell you which technologies the state believes could shape military balances, strategic vulnerability, or industrial dependency if left to circulate too freely. And once trusted partners become part of the vocabulary, you can hear the alliance map clicking into place in the background. That is what strategic technology looks like in real life. One year it is a promising field. A few years later, it is sitting in the same policy conversation as semiconductors, aerospace, and cryptography. That export control turn also hints at something people often miss. Quantum computing is not a single product. It is a stack. Cryogenics, control electronics, photonics, laser systems, specialty materials, packaging, error correction, software, fabrication, and cloud access all matter. A country may be strong in algorithms and weak in hardware. It may be strong in optics and weak in manufacturing. It may produce brilliant theoretical work and still depend on foreign tools to turn that work into functioning devices. This is why the geopolitics of quantum looks more like semiconductor geopolitics than like a neat race to a finish line. The winners will not simply be the ones who prove a concept in a lab. They will be the ones who can command enough of the stack to avoid strategic dependence. Physics gets the headlines. Plumbing gets the empire. That brings us to talent, which may be the most underrated front in this contest. Quantum is not merely short on machines, it is short on people, and not in a polite HR way. It needs physicists, engineers, cryptographers, computer scientists, technicians, standard specialists, and managers who can move between research and deployment. A country can announce funding all day long. If it lacks the people to do the work, the money will eventually slosh around in circles until some consultant produces a chart and everybody nods as though this were a substitute for competence. The country that builds a deep bench will have an advantage that lasts longer than any single generation of hardware. Talent compounds. So does neglect. This is one reason the quantum race is also a scholarship race, an immigration race, and an education race. It will be shaped by graduate fellowships, visa policy, university quality, research security, and the ability of states to keep bright people from drifting into easier and better paid sectors before the field matures. A serious quantum strategy is partly a workforce strategy with national security consequences. It is nation building for a field whose bottlenecks wear lab coats. That may sound less thrilling than the usual media fantasy about computers cracking the universe open like an egg, but it is closer to how power actually accumulates. People build states. States do not build themselves through inspirational keynote slides. There is another quiet front in this struggle: standards. The public tends to notice machines and money. States notice standards, because standards are where future markets and future dependencies get quietly locked in. The move toward post-quantum cryptography shows this clearly. Once governments, firms, and international bodies begin settling on algorithms, protocols, and transition timelines, the political implications become enormous. Standards decide who sells, who buys, who interoperates, and who gets left translating between incompatible systems. The country that shapes standards shapes the terrain on which everyone else must operate. That raises a serious possibility. The world may not settle into one neat, universally trusted quantum security order. It may split into partially aligned blocks with different preferences, procurement rules, trust chains, and national security requirements. If that happens, quantum computing will not merely be a science competition, it will be a standards war with cryptography at its center. That may sound dry, but standards wars are among the most important and least glamorous forms of geopolitical conflict. In the age of quantum, the fight over mathematics may become a fight over sovereignty. People also miss the fact that quantum geopolitics is not confined to the great powers. Smaller states will face familiar choices: align, rent, or fall behind. Some will try to build niche strengths. Others will rely on cloud access to foreign systems. Others will become markets rather than makers. In that sense, quantum may deepen an old pattern in global politics, where the cutting edge is owned by a few and rented by the many. Yet cloud delivery could soften that divide somewhat by letting middle powers access useful quantum tools without owning the full industrial chain. The machine may be national, the service can still be rented. That means the future here may look less like nuclear monopoly and more like a layered hierarchy of access. That is why the geopolitics of quantum computing is larger than the race to produce the first truly transformative machine. The real prizes are resilience, secrecy, standards, talent, supply chains, and industrial depth. America still has major strengths. China has patience, coordination, and political will. Europe wants sovereignty before it becomes dependency with better manners. Britain wants specific missions tied to real capabilities. Export controls are tightening. Cryptographic migration is underway. Standards bodies are moving. The race is already here, even if the hardware remains immature by popular fantasy standards. In fact, that is what makes this phase so important. Once a technology becomes obviously decisive, the room gets crowded and the mistakes get expensive. The countries that move well in the ambiguous years often shape the settled order that follows. The countries that wait for perfect clarity tend to inherit a future designed by others. The deepest truth here is that quantum computing is not really about replacing every classical computer or conjuring some wizard box that rules the planet. It is about selective advantage. A country that can secure its systems sooner, train its workforce faster, control more of the stack, shape the standards, and turn lab knowledge into deployable capability will enjoy an edge in the 21st century. That edge may appear first in cybersecurity, defense, materials, logistics, finance, or sensing. It may arrive unevenly and with much less cinematic glory than people expect. That is usually how power works in real life. It does not always enter on horseback. Sometimes it arrives in procurement guidance, export classifications, test beds, and graduate fellowships. Quantum computing is becoming geopolitical because states have begun to see it that way. And once states start seeing a technology as strategic, the technology itself changes. It acquires borders, classifications, subsidies, alliances, and enemies. The science remains strange. The politics become very familiar. The same old questions return in new clothing. Who leads? Who depends? Who secures? Who exports? Who standardizes? Who controls the bottlenecks? Who notices too late that the future has already been fenced and divided? That is the part ordinary people should remember. The technologies that shape the world are rarely decided only by technical merit. They are shaped by institutions, industrial stamina, political seriousness, and the willingness of states to treat science as an element of power rather than as a decorative luxury. The West once understood that quite well. Then it got rich enough to grow sloppy and sentimental about it. Quantum computing is one more reminder that reality still favors disciplined nations over complacent ones. The future does not belong automatically to the clever. It belongs to the clever who organize. Watch the next video, because this story is larger than quantum computing itself. It is about how nations fight over the future before the future is fully built, and about whether the West still remembers how to treat science as a pillar of power instead of a decorative luxury. This has been Gene Botkin with Ellen Arda. End transmission.